Before I get started talking about the King of Fighters XIV, I just want to address a couple of things pertaining to the last video. The overall topic last time was what needs to be accomplished before Capcom vs. SNK 3 becomes compelling, or even at all realistic in a mass market sense, and one of the major items on that list involved Capcom activating many of its long-dormant fighting IPs. The reason for this is that while Marvel vs. Capcom may benefit from Capcom's licenses outside of the fighting genre, the relatively traditional SNK meshes much better with genre-native franchises and characters. I'm pleased to report that there has been some potential movement on that front, as Capcom has revealed in a recent investor conference call that in order to match increased investment in workforce of late, several dormant IPs are going to be called off the bench to increase profitability. It would be far too early to suggest that this is tantamount to a confirmation of Darkstalkers 4, Rival Schools 3, or other such projects, since Capcom's vault of big-ticket IPs extends well outside the genre, but it certainly isn't cause for pessimism either, and is a situation worth watching if Capcom growing into a potential CVS3 situation is something you find worthwhile. Another thing I want to touch on is that while I spoke at length about Capcom vs. SNK 3, I really didn't say anything about a theoretical SNK-developed counterpart, which may have seemed odd with SNK being the true topic of discussion. The simple reality is Capcom vs. SNK 2 was the high point of the crossovers as far as anyone remembers it, and while Match of the Millennium was an exemplary title for how SNK's side should have gone, with all kinds of awesome team mechanics in play, familiar stages, and music literally everywhere, a diverse character roster from all over both companies' back catalogs, and extras for days, SVC Chaos was more than a little flat in comparison. A strict one-on-one game that served more as KOF vs. Street Fighter and Friends with almost no fan service to speak of. It almost felt like the game was only crapped out to put some unused music and background assets to use before SNK closed the book on the Neo Geo for good. It should also be said that the original SNK developed Match of the Millennium, and SNK Playmore brought us Chaos, so maybe that's a good sign, but the point remains that it's Capcom vs. SNK 3 that would justifiably get the most buzz out of all of these potential projects. Moving on. I previously stated that this video would be about how SNK could get the most out of the King of Fighters XIV, but honestly this is going to be a short list, simply because they've been doing so much so right since the instant the game went into development. There are still a few odds and ends I want to touch on before I leave the SNK KOF 14 topic, though. The first item is one that I want to get through quickly, but already know I'm going to spend a disproportionate amount of time on because I want to get it exactly right. Now, it's difficult to single out one character out of a roster of 50 to be handled in a very particular way, but it's also kind of an unavoidable question: how to depict a character like Mai Shiranui in 2016. No, this isn't some stupid activist band. I'm not calling for any kind of full-scale redesign or radical overhaul here, because not only have all character designs for KOF 14 likely been finalized at this point, I honestly don't believe one is needed. Of course, I wouldn't complain about getting her almost DOA-like Maximum Impact alternate as DLC either, because that was fantastic, and really made it clear that SNK had some talent in-house that could come up with alternate costumes that were really up there with anything that Namco could come up with. The problem isn't that Mai is the queen of fanservice, the problem is the character behind it, or lack thereof. To sum up her character, she's the granddaughter of Andy Bogard's master, became devoted to and obsessed with Andy immediately, and has spent the last 24 years of Fatal Fury and King of Fighters games constantly assisting and stalking him in almost equal measure. That is it. That is 24 years of character wrapped up in a single sentence. For a bit character, some comic relief on the side, that might cut it. The problem is SNK has frequently utilized Mai as their standard bearer for female characters almost from the beginning, despite themselves, in their various incarnations and with their third-party partners, having steadily stocked the shelves over the years with better options for that role. Right? Right? This became really awkward when the Capcom crossovers took place, and she was presented by both companies as SNK's direct counterpart to police detective, revenge seeker, adoptive mother, chronic Vega killer, occasional tier list dominator, strongest woman in the fucking world, Chun-Li. They really don't have to redesign Mai to fix this. They don't even really have to make her break her current character in any way, since so much of her is still a blank slate thanks, strangely enough, to the simplicity of her past depictions. All they have to do is give her some kind of deeper involvement, a crowning moment of awesome where she can show that in addition to being a fan service icon and comically obsessed Andy Bogard fangirl, because the point is to bring Mai up to Chun-Li's level, not reconstruct her wholesale into a carbon copy, there is more of a character to build upon. After all, King and Yuri have stuck by her all these years for a reason, right? and the extra shot of good publicity surrounding a fighting game mainstay being sensibly modernized for 2016 couldn't hurt leading up to KOF 14's late August launch. Yeah, way more time than I intended to spend on that. For the next item on the list, the word is opportunism. Now let it be said first and foremost that I will defend Street Fighter V to the death. I think it is an incredible Street Fighter game and an absolute return to form after a divisive Street Fighter IV that really forced veteran players to unlearn nearly 2 decades of deeply ingrained logic in order to be competitive. With all that having been said, mainstream perceptions are what they are, and there is ample room for a new 2D fighting game to move in and pick up a huge audience that's hungry for the 50-character roster and all of the single-player and multiplayer fixins alike, getting into the market as the must-have 2D fighting game to feed the masses who felt starved by Street Fighter V is a best-case scenario that SNK absolutely should be gunning for here. SNK and Atlus need to take whatever marketing budget they have, which under SNK's new ownership should be considerable, to get that message in front of as many people as they possibly can, at least without being so mean-spirited and belligerent about it that it puts the possibility of future crossover projects in question. Acknowledge the elephant in the room, present yourselves as an ideal alternative to that, but try to avoid putting Capcom on full blast, because ideally these companies will be working together again in the future, and it would be terrible to see the possibility destroyed by suddenly having the specter of legitimate acrimony hanging over them. This will be a delicate balance and one I'm not entirely sure how to implement, but that's why I'm a C-list gaming media personality and not a highly paid advertising executive. Now let's talk about balance. This is going to be difficult in a game that boasts a roster of 50 characters, but that also increases its importance. After all, there's really no point in having a roster of that many characters if you're only going to see 4 or 5 of them actually get any play after the first year or so. Your character roster is only really as large as the number of characters who can reasonably compete. The good news is that as a more traditional, down-to-earth 2D fighter, balance will be easier to achieve in KOF 14. Problems are easier to spot and root out than they are in something more over the top. Combine that with the frequent load tests we've been seeing from SNK over the last couple of months, and the likelihood is very good that problematic characters will be rooted out well in advance of the game going gold, presumably shortly after EVO 2016. Just putting that out there. Last but certainly not least on this list is online functionality. First of all, netcode is something SNK can't afford to play around with given the unprecedented visibility KOF 14 is already getting. Handle it in-house if it's actually possible, but don't hesitate to back off on the in-house endeavor and pick up something like GGPO at the first sign of trouble. Even if one of the big goals of this game is to pick up a huge audience at the expense of Capcom's lack of single-player features, it's still important to have plenty of ways for people to gather around KOF 14, and online is a big one. Online functionality doesn't begin and end with netcode either. If the only thing you can do is log in and play casual or ranked matches, even very good casual or ranked matches, the online appeal just isn't going to stick. Capcom is not off base when they talk about Street Fighter as a social platform, and while Street Fighter V has probably already reserved itself the role of chief title for the FGC to gravitate toward, there is absolutely nothing wrong with carving out your own niche and giving your own fans something to rally around. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed these last few videos. It was especially hard putting this one together because it seemed like SNK was carrying out the ideas I was having even before I could get a video out. It really seems as we get closer to the release of KOF 14 that we're looking at something really special in the works. That's it for now, but I'll be back soon with my take on something a little more divisive.